Most people assume the danger is obvious when it comes, that something inside you will go quiet, that the air will feel different, that you'll know. But the cases that haunt investigators longest, the ones that keep people up at night, aren't the ones where the danger was hiding. They're the ones where the danger was standing right there in plain sight, and nobody thought to look twice. Tonight we're looking. 5 cases, 5 victims who deserve better. 5 stories that slipped through the cracks of a system that was supposed to protect them. So turn the lights down and let's begin. Case 1, Reyna Alvarado-Carrera. The witness who vanished. She was the only person who could identify him, and then she was gone. Reyna Alvarado-Carrera was 28 years old, a Guatemalan immigrant living in Houston, Texas, with her 2 young children. She worked double shifts at a restaurant on Airline Drive, sent money home to her mother every month without fail, and was in the middle of applying for legal status when her life was upended by something that had nothing to do with her. In October 2004, Reyna witnessed a shooting outside her apartment complex. A man she recognized from the neighborhood, not a stranger, not a ghost, shot another man in broad daylight and fled the scene. Reyna cooperated with police. She gave a statement. She identified the shooter from a photo lineup without hesitation, and that was the moment everything changed for her. Within days of giving her statement, Reyna told her neighbor that a man had been following her. A car she didn't recognize sat parked outside her building for long stretches at night. She stopped letting her kids walk to the corner store. She started checking the locks twice. She called the detective assigned to her case and told him she was scared. She asked about witness protection. She asked about relocation. She was told to call back if anything concrete happened. On November 14, 2004, Reyna dropped her children off at a neighbor's apartment to go pick up her paycheck from the restaurant. It was a 10-minute drive. She told her neighbor she'd be back before dinner. She never came back. Her car was found 3 days later in a parking lot off the Shucking 45-feeder road. The driver's side door was unlocked. Her purse was on the seat. Her phone had been wiped, factory reset, and placed neatly in the cup holder. Police initially treated it as a missing persons case. Then 3 weeks later, a construction crew breaking ground on a new strip mall on the outskirts of northwest Houston found a body in a shallow trench beneath the soil. It was Reyna. She'd been shot once in the back of the head, execution style. The suspect she had identified, a man with prior arrests for aggravated assault and weapons charges, had a documented history of threatening witnesses in previous cases. 2 people who had been scheduled to testify against him in unrelated incidents had recanted under circumstances investigators found suspicious. One had moved out of state. One had never been heard from again. He was arrested for the original shooting Reyna witnessed. When detectives tried to add her murder to the charges, the case stalled. Without Reyna, the only eyewitness, the prosecution of the original shooting grew complicated. Defense attorneys moved aggressively. Evidence was challenged. He was eventually convicted of the original murder and sentenced to 35 years. Reyna's murder has never been officially cleared. No one has been charged. Her children were raised by Reyna's sister, who moved to Houston from Guatemala to take them in. The oldest, who was 6 at the time of her mother's death, has spent years trying to get answers through advocacy organizations that support immigrant crime victims. As of today, Reyna Alvarado-Carrera is listed as a solved homicide. She was killed because she did the right thing. She told the truth when no one would have blamed her for staying quiet, and the system she trusted to protect her couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone. There's a particular cruelty to this kind of case. Reyna didn't stumble into danger. She tried to do everything right. She cooperated. She identified. She called back. She just called the wrong people. Case 2. Brandon Swanson. One last call. He was on the phone with his father when he disappeared. His dad was on the line, listening, talking him through it. And then Brandon said something, a single word, and the call went dead. He was never found. Brandon Swanson was 19 years old, a farm kid from Marshall, Minnesota, studying agricultural business at Southwest Minnesota State University. He was the kind of person who helped his neighbors with their harvest, who came home for dinner on Sundays, who still called his parents just to check in. On the night of May 13, 2008, Brandon was driving home from a party near the small town of Lynn. It was late. The roads were dark. And somewhere between Lynn and Marshall, his car slid off the road and got stuck in a ditch. He called his parents. His father, Brian, drove out immediately, following Brandon's directions as best he could over the phone. Brandon said he could see the lights of Lynn in the distance. He started walking toward them, still on the phone with his dad, talking, narrating the ground under his feet. Gravel, then mud, then grass. They talked for 47 minutes, and then Brandon said one word. "Oh!" And the call dropped. Brian called back immediately. No answer. He drove the roads for hours, calling out for his son, shining his headlights into ditches. Nothing. By morning, the Swanson family had called police. A search was launched across the area between Lynn and Marshall, a flat agricultural stretch of southwest Minnesota with fields, drainage ditches, and the Canby River running through it. Search teams, cadaver dogs, helicopters, volunteers. Hundreds of people spent weeks combing the area. They found Brandon's car. They found his phone in the ditch near where he'd gone off the road. But they didn't find Brandon. The working theory was that he'd wandered in a different direction than he thought. That in the dark, disoriented, he'd misjudged where he was. The lights he thought were Lynn may have been farm equipment or yard lights in the opposite direction. If he'd walked toward the Canby River in the darkness, in that terrain, it was possible, the investigator said, that he had fallen in. The river was searched. Nothing. In 2009, a year after Brandon's disappearance, his family went to the Minnesota legislature and pushed for what became known as the Brandon Alert, a missing persons notification system for young adults, filling the gap between Amber Alert, which applied to minors, and the standard 24 to 48-hour waiting period before adults could be reported missing. Brandon's family had experienced that delay firsthand. The Brandon Alert passed. It was a genuine, meaningful change born out of unbearable grief. But Brandon was never found. His case remains open. There has never been any evidence of foul play. No witnesses, no suspects, no signs of anything other than a terrible accident in the dark. But his family has never been able to bury him. They've never had a funeral. They've never had a grave to stand at. They just have 47 minutes of phone call ending in a single syllable. What did he see? And what was that last sound? Was it the bank of the river giving way under his feet? Was it something else entirely? We don't know. And that is its own particular kind of grief. Not just the loss, but the absence of an ending. No answer, no bottom. Just a phone that rang and rang into the dark Minnesota night, and no one picked up. Case 3, Tammy Zywicki. Interstate. She had a flat tire on the side of the highway. In less than 10 minutes, she was gone. Tammy Zywicki was 21 years old, a junior at Grinnell College in Iowa, and on August 23, 1992, she was driving her 1988 Pontiac Le Mans back to school for the start of the fall semester. Her parents had just waved her off from their home in Deerfield, Illinois. The drive was roughly 4 hours, and Tammy had made it before. She was on I-80 in LaSalle County, Illinois, flat, open highway, cornfield stretching in every direction, when a tire blew. She pulled over to the shoulder. She was less than a mile from an exit. 2 truck drivers passed her car within minutes of each other. Both later told police the same thing. They saw Tammy standing beside her disabled vehicle. They saw a large semi-truck parked behind her, driver's side door open. The first trucker thought she had help. The second trucker, passing just minutes later, noticed the Pontiac was still there. But Tammy wasn't standing beside it anymore. The semi was gone. Neither man stopped. Both kept driving. That was the last time anyone saw Tammy Zywicki alive. Her parents reported her missing when she failed to arrive at Grinnell. An Illinois State Police search of the highway found her car locked and with her belongings still inside. The flat tire was confirmed. The car was just sitting there exactly where those 2 truckers had seen it. 19 days later, Tammy's body was found in a ditch beside I-44 in Missouri, nearly 400 miles away. She had been stabbed. Her body showed signs of restraint. She had been held for a period of time before she died. The realization that settled over investigators was one of the worst in the case. Tammy had been alive for some of those 19 days. The investigation turned immediately to the trucking community. The I-80 corridor was a major freight route. Thousands of trucks passed through LaSalle County every day. Police worked with the FBI and trucking companies to identify drivers who had been on that stretch of highway in that window of time. A composite sketch was developed based on the 2 eyewitness truckers' descriptions of the semi they had seen. It was distinctive, a large rig described as possibly a Peterbilt or Kenworth with specific markings. Tips came in from across the country. Thousands of leads were chased. None of them resulted in an arrest. In 1992, DNA analysis was available, but primitive. The evidence collected from Tammy's body and clothing was preserved. And in the years that followed, advances in technology allowed investigators to refine the genetic profile of whoever had been with her. In 2019, Illinois State Police announced they had developed a strong suspect using investigative genetic genealogy, the same technique that cracked the Golden State Killer case. They would not name the suspect publicly. They stated the investigation was active and ongoing. In 2023, they announced again that the case was still active, that they were still working it, that they had not given up. Tammy's brother Mark has spent 3 decades pushing for answers. He has spoken to legislators, worked with cold case advocates, and kept his sister's name in front of anyone who would listen. He was there at every press conference. He is still waiting. Tammy Zywicki stopped on the side of a highway to deal with a flat tire. She did nothing wrong. She was not reckless. She was in trouble on the side of a busy road, and someone stopped to offer help, and she accepted it. Because what else do you do when your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere and someone pulls over? You accept the help, and most of the time, you make it home. Tammy didn't. In Case 4, Charles Browning, The Wrong Cell. He walked into a police station. He told them exactly what happened to him, and they arrested him for it. Charles Browning was 34 years old, a black man living in Birmingham, Alabama, working as a warehouse supervisor and raising his teenage son on his own. By every account from the people who knew him, Charles was steady, the kind of person who showed up early, stayed late, and didn't ask for much. On the night of March 7, 2009, Charles was carjacked. Two men approached him in the parking lot of a convenience store on the south side of Birmingham, put a gun in his face, and took his car, a 2003 Chevy Impala that he'd paid off 6 months earlier. They left him standing in the parking lot. He wasn't hurt. He was shaken, and he was furious. And he did exactly what you're supposed to do. He walked 3 blocks to the nearest police precinct and reported the carjacking. What happened next took 4 years to fully unravel. When officers ran Charles's name during the intake process, a warrant came back. It was from 2006, an old failure to appear on a minor traffic violation that Charles said he'd paid and believed was resolved. He had a receipt. The receipt was at home. He didn't have it with him at the police station because he'd gone to report a crime, not to defend his own record. He was arrested on the spot. His car was now gone. His son was home alone expecting his father back within the hour, and Charles was booked into Jefferson County Jail on an outstanding warrant. With a carjacking report, the reason Charles had walked into that precinct was filed but deprioritized. 2 detectives were assigned. They made initial inquiries. And then, according to case records reviewed years later by a journalist from the Birmingham News, the file went largely dormant within 2 weeks. Charles spent 3 days in jail before his sister was able to post bond and produce the documentation showing the 2006 fine had been paid. The warrant was recalled. He was released. His car was never recovered. No arrests were made in the carjacking. But that isn't where this story ends, because Charles Browning didn't let it end there. Over the following year, he filed complaints with the department's Internal Affairs Division. He reached out to the city council. When he hired an attorney who filed a civil suit alleging that the department's failure to adequately investigate his carjacking, while detaining him for the very act of reporting it, constituted deliberate indifference and a racially discriminatory pattern of policing. What the attorney's investigation uncovered was damning. A review of Birmingham PD records from 2006 to 2010 found a statistically significant disparity in the rate at which carjacking reports filed by black victims in certain precincts were marked as inactive within 30 days, compared to reports filed by white victims in comparable circumstances. The pattern wasn't absolute, but it was consistent enough that Internal Affairs opened its own inquiry. The civil suit was settled in 2013 for an undisclosed amount. The department issued a statement citing ongoing reforms to how outstanding warrant checks are handled during victim intake. No officers were disciplined. No supervisors were reassigned. The men who stole Charles's car were never caught. Charles Browning still lives in Birmingham. His son is grown now. Charles still talks about that night. Not with bitterness, he says, though you'd understand if he did, but because he wants people to understand what it actually means when a system fails you. It's not always dramatic. It's not always one catastrophic moment. Sometimes it's 3 days in a cell when you did nothing wrong. Sometimes it's a file going dormant. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision made somewhere behind a desk that your case isn't worth the follow-through. Charles Browning walked into a police station to report a crime. and he should have been able to walk back out the same way. Case 5. Lena Chapin. The confession nobody heard. Before she disappeared, Lena Chapin told people exactly what had happened to her. She wrote it down. She said it out loud. She named the person responsible, and nobody did anything until it was too late. Lena Chapin grew up in Hannah City, Illinois, in a home that was, by most accounts, a difficult one. Her mother, Sandra Melton, had a relationship with a man named Steve Hessler that everyone around them could see was volatile. Arguments were frequent. The children, Lena and her sisters, grew up in the middle of it. In 2000, when Lena was 13, her stepfather, Dennis Cheever, a man her mother had been with for several years, went missing. He was a truck driver who, according to Sandra, had simply left. "I packed up one day and never came back. Nobody pushed too hard on it. People leave. It happens." At least that's what Sandra said. Lena was 17 when she first told a school counselor that she was afraid of her mother. She didn't go into detail at the time, but she said there were things that had happened in her house that no one knew about. The counselor filed a report. Social services paid a visit. Sandra was cooperative, charming even, and the file was closed. By the time Lena was in her early 20s, she had moved out. She kept in loose contact with her sisters, but she was trying to build some distance from the family. She got an apartment in Peoria. She worked at a diner. She started talking more openly to people she trusted about what she'd witnessed growing up. And then, in a series of recorded conversations with her boyfriend over the course of 2008 and 2009, Lena Chapin said it clearly. Her mother, Sandra, had killed Dennis Cheever. Lena had seen it. She was 13 years old when it happened, and she had been living with that knowledge for the better part of a decade. She said her mother had shot him. She said she knew where the body was buried. She said she had been afraid to come forward because Sandra had made it very clear, in the way that only a parent can make something clear to a child, that Lena would not be believed, that Lena would be destroyed if she talked. Her boyfriend brought those recordings to police in early 2009. Investigators took the statement. They opened an inquiry. They began looking into Dennis Cheever's disappearance from 9 years earlier. And then, before anything could be formally charged, Lena Chapin disappeared. She was 23 years old. She vanished in November 2009. Her apartment was left in a state that suggested she hadn't planned to leave. Dishes in the sink, clothes in the closet, keys on the counter. Her car was gone. She was gone. Sandra Melton, when questioned by investigators, said she had no idea where her daughter was. She said Lena had always been troubled, unstable, the kind of person who took off without warning. The detectives working Dennis Cheever's case and the detectives working Lena's disappearance initially operated as two separate units. It took months before anyone formally connected the two files. By 2010, investigators had developed enough in the Cheever case to charge Sandra Melton with his murder. The excavation of a property Sandra had previously lived on produced human remains that were later confirmed, through dental records and forensic analysis, to be Dennis Cheever's. He had been shot exactly as Lena had described. Sandra Melton was convicted of first-degree murder in 2012 and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Lena Chapin has never been found. Prosecutors argued at sentencing that Sandra was almost certainly responsible for Lena's disappearance as well. A second murder charge was not brought due to insufficient physical evidence. No body, no forensic proof, no witnesses. The timeline was raised in open court. The judge acknowledged it on the record. And still, Sandra Melton was convicted of one murder, not two. She has never been charged in connection with Lena's case. She has never given any account of where Lena went. She has maintained from her prison cell that she knows nothing about her daughter's disappearance. Lena's sisters have spent years keeping her story alive. They know what they believe happened. They know that Lena spent years carrying knowledge that was dangerous to carry, and that the moment she handed it over to the people who were supposed to protect her, the clock started running. Lena Chapin recorded the truth. She gave it to police. She did the one thing survivors of family violence are always told to do. She spoke up. She named the person. She gave details. She handed over evidence. And the system moved slowly enough that someone got to her first. There is still a $10,000 reward for information on Lena Chapin's whereabouts. Her case is still listed as an open missing persons investigation in Peoria County. Sandra Melton is currently incarcerated. Her earliest possible release date falls within the next decade. Lena was 23 years old. She had just started building a life outside the shadow of her childhood. She had finally, after years of silence, decided to tell the truth. She deserved to see what happened next. She didn't get to. 5 cases, 5 people who, in one way or another, trusted the right instincts and still ended up on the wrong side of what the world owed them. Reyna, who told the truth and paid for it. Brandon, who called his dad and just vanished. Tammy, who accepted help from a stranger on a highway and never made it home. Charles, who walked into a precinct to do the right thing and walked out 3 days later in handcuffs. And Lena, who finally spoke up, finally named the person, finally handed over the evidence, and disappeared before anyone could act on it. These aren't cautionary tales. They're not lessons about what these people should have done differently. They did everything right. The failures weren't theirs. They were ours. The systems that exist to protect people don't always protect people. And the cases that fall through the cracks, the ones buried by bureaucracy, by indifference, by the quiet decision that this particular file isn't worth the follow-through, those cases still have names attached to them. They still have families waiting. If something in one of these stories feels familiar, if there's a name you know, a detail you recognize, the tip lines are still open. The rewards are still standing. The families are still listening. We'll be back next time with more cases that were never supposed to see the light. Until then, lock the door, check the locks again, and remember the names. They're counting on someone to remember.